Hi everyone, Mrs. Norris here. So this is part 2 of the tutorial for tyranny versus democracy. And part 2 is really more for people who need a little extra help with answering the questions. So my goal with part 2 is to model for you how to complete the tyranny page, and then you will complete the democracy end on your own. Okay, so I've already started this with the tyranny. I answered the question, how does the word originate? And I found that in the text in paragraph 1. I used my highlighting boxes to highlight the answer and then copied the answer onto my chart. Okay, so now I need to answer my next question. How is this government practiced? So this question is really asking you, how does the tyrant, I forgot the word for a second, how does a tyrant come to power? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this, and I remember from my reading that in the past, in a monarchy, such as King of England has right now, or the Queen of England, when the Queen of England dies, her son is going to take over. That's not how it works with a tyrant. A tyrant takes the control away from someone else, not passing it down to a child, okay? And they get that control in part by manipulating the people for their support, all right? So how is this government practiced? So first of all, a tyrant and sorry, it's up here. um, a tyrant is starkly, a tyrant is very different from, a tyranny is very different from a monarchy, okay? Because in a monarchy, power is passed down to the oldest son in a peaceful tradition, okay? And that's not what happens here, okay? They've seized power illegally. Okay. Now I do need some more boxes, and because democracy is on the next page, I can use my boxes over here. So I want to make sure that I note that there's no voting, so they don't get into power by voting, right? So they need the support of their people in order to get power. So I'm going to go down here. It's my last sentence. Tyrants desperately needed the support of the people to overthrow the king or oligarch. Okay. So again, with this question, what they're really asking is, how does a tyrant come into power? So with a democracy, you'll learn that you come into power by voting. The people vote. They voice their opinion about who they want to be in control, and then that person gets control. Okay. A tyrant is different. In a tyranny, instead of passing it down like in a monarchy, they take the control, but they need the support of the people to be able to do it. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to type that answer into my chart, and then I'll come back and work with you on answer number 3. All right, so as you can see, I've got my answer for how is the government practiced, meaning how does a tyrant come into control. The oldest son does not take over. The tyrant seizes the power illegally by overthrowing a king or oligarch. A tyrant gains the support of the people to overthrow the government. Okay? So now I'm going to move on to the next question. What is known about this government in Greece? So how did this government we already know how it took control, but how does it maintain control? How does it keep its power over the people in Greece? And so in the next question, we'll talk about today. Okay, so what is known about the government in Greece? So we know that tyrants are almost always a military leader. So I'm going to include that answer into my answer. Okay. What else? So they understood how to inspire men in battle and how to move personnel to secure victories. So I think that this whole paragraph here will help me with that answer. So I'm just going to make that a little bigger. They ruled alone. And let's see. I want to include that. So they often ruled alone. I already know that they took power in an unconstitutional manner, so I'm not going to include that in my answer. But I do know that they did learn that they ruled alone, so I'm going to use that. Let's see. It says, however, just because their rule was illegal, it does not mean that they were not loved by the people. I'm going to go back over here. In order to gain and keep approval, tyrants would often lavish their people with food, luxury items, money, and even forgive their debts. So I'm going to use that as my answer. Okay. That's good. And then what else did I learn? Over time, though, tyrants often developed bad reputations as they began to abuse their power. So I'm going to use some of my highlighting from over here. Okay. All right. Let's see. People live their lives in fear instead of peace. So none of the rest of this will really help me with this question. Because then it's going to move us into democracy. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video again, and I'm going to put everything I've highlighted in green into an answer on my chart over here. And then we'll come back again for the last question. All right, so I've answered the next question. What is known about this government in Greece? So how did a tyrant sustain their power in Greece? So tyrants used their military leadership to gain support of the people. Tyrants often bribed people for their support, and over time, some tyrants began to abuse their power. So the last question, what do you know about it today, really wants you to look at what you understand about what a tyrant might be based on what you know about the world today and government today. Okay, so you have to think about where we're at right now with our learning. So we're talking about how the colonists thought that King George was a tyrant and that he had absolute power over them. And so they wanted to make sure that they formed a government that was different from that. Also, too, you think about, and this is 2020, so we're thinking about the fact that we just had an election. And if you're following what's been happening, there's a certain amount of tyranny going on right now with our current president failing to concede a loss in the election. And so he's trying to maintain his power, possibly using illegal maneuvers, possibly not. But either way, there's still this idea of a single person who is trying to manipulate the system to maintain power. So those are the two ideas I'm going to put together into a sentence, a response here. Okay. So the colonists, I'm going to take off colonists, the framers of the Constitution felt like the king was a tyrant with absolute control, and they wanted to form a government for their newly formed United States that was opposite of that. Okay, so the framers of the Constitution felt like the king was a tyrant with absolute control, and they wanted to form a government for their newly formed United States that was opposite of that. Okay, so that's the kind of government that we live in today. This is the kind of government we live in today, meaning not a tyranny. Which will also help us to answer our question over here. So in your answer for democracy, you can talk about how in, again, 2020, you can talk about how we just had an election. We do have some of the checks and balances and separations of power that help the government run smoothly, to be sure that whoever is in power is doing it the right way, is gaining power the right way. Okay, so find an image to show this government. While we were paused, I kind of did that already. So this makes me feel like it's a good image. I also like the king one, so I'm going to use both. I'm going to copy this image and then go back to my reading, and I'm going to paste. It's probably going to be super huge. So I'm going to minimize it, make it much smaller. I also liked the picture of the king, so I'm going to choose that picture as well. Okay, so here I've got my two pictures to show my understanding of what tyranny means. And hopefully at this point, after this sort of updated tutorial, you have an idea of how to complete this compare and contrast chart, and you can do this on your own for democracy. Okay, so now that I've modeled for you how to do tyranny on your own, go back and complete the democracy section.